Hello, today I'm going to talk about South America and give you some information about the South American continent. It's our nearest continental neighbor. It is the largest, well, it's larger than the continental United States. It's about the same size as North America. South America was settled originally. The estimate is that there were, when Western explorers and sailors came to the Western Hemisphere, there may have been as many as 12 million native peoples living here throughout all of North America, Central America, and South America. So 12 million is quite a lot. It was not uninhabited. It was an area that was richly used. People didn't live in one area specifically. You couldn't say this area was where this tribe lived, but rather this was more or less this tribe operated, and they had borders with neighboring tribes, sort of like the way I talked before about how when climate change is happening, as a species needs to find a new area, it will run into other species that are in that area. So there may be some conflict. So this is probably what was happening, we assume, with native peoples. When let me go back a little bit and talk about how the Crusades in the 1200s were related to kings in Northern Europe, in Germany and England and France, and the lower countries decided to declare war on Islam and to move east and to retake the Holy Land, which was very important for the Christian church, to say we need to have control of Jerusalem, which is an important part in Israel. And so they had these what were called the Crusades, and that comes from the word the cross, because they followed the cross of Christianity. So the Crusades were that. At the same time, there was a Moorish or an Islamic Muslim population that was in charge of what's now Spain and Portugal. And so Spain and Portugal couldn't participate in this because they were under the domination of Islam. In 1492, the two kingdoms of Aragon and Castile united and forced the Moorish people, they call them the Moors, into Morocco, hence the name Morocco. And so at that point, Spain and Portugal were free to participate in their own crusade. And their crusade was to go west into what was then called the New World and to take over and to Christianize those people, to convert them to Christianity, and also to find wealth and riches. Gold and silver, apparently, from what I've been reading, were available, but they were not, because there was so much of it, it wasn't as valuable in the Western Hemisphere as it was in the Europe or the Eastern Hemisphere. So people didn't care much about it, but when the conquerors came, they said, we need to have your gold and silver. And so what they did was they colonized. They started in the Caribbean and then moved into Central America, South America, and it sort of became a race for riches in what was called the New World, although it was not new to the people who lived there for thousands of years, potentially. So there are, just back to South America, I've talked a little bit about Central America before, also settled by people, Spanish speakers. South America was settled by Spanish speakers, Portuguese speakers, English speakers, Dutch speakers, and French speakers. The predominant language in most countries is Spanish. It's mostly down the Pacific coast from Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, Chile, Argentina, and Uruguay. Brazil is the largest country in South America, and it was, again, going back to what was happening at the time, Christianity was a very important aspect of what was going on in Western civilization. In 1493, the Pope in Rome said he was going to divide the world in half, and half would become Spain's to colonize, and the other half would become Portugal's, because Portugal was a very strong sea power. So he drew a line called the Treaty of Tordesillas, and it went right through the center of South America. Well, Brazil, or the Portuguese, didn't care for this so much, and they said, well, we want to have more land. So they pushed west, and they were called the Bandeirantes, which meant they were following the flag. So they pushed. So Brazil became the largest country by force of arms, and is now a very large, it's still a very large country, and it's the largest, is larger than the United States by itself. So those are the main countries of South America. They speak Spanish except for Brazil. There were 3 colonies, a French colony, which is called Guyana, a Dutch colony which is called Suriname, and an English colony which is called Guyana. And so in those three countries they speak either whatever the the predominant language is of that country. Historically, the European colonizing powers took all the riches from those colonies and went back, took the money back to Europe. And so ultimately a lot of that riches that came, not just gold and silver, but also all the resources that they were able to bring, the wood and various other materials, went to finance the Industrial Revolution. So the Dutch became the bankers for Europe. They bought these goods and then lent the money to Spain and Portugal to continue to colonize. So basically those countries became strong colonizing powers. In about the 1820s, there was a great desire to become independent of the colonies. The American Revolution in 1776, the French Revolution in 1789 were great modifiers, great factors that created a desire for freedom. There was also a great slave revolution in Haiti, led by a man named Toussaint Louverture. And so the French got very excited about this and decided they were done with the Western Hemisphere, so that's why Napoleon sold Louisiana to Thomas Jefferson, because they wanted to be done with the Western Hemisphere and concentrate on what was going on in Europe and the next Napoleonic urges in Europe and the wars. So South America became this area that really was full of riches, but still had this revolutionary aspect to it. And like a lot of colonial powers, a lot of former colonial dependencies, these folks said, well, this is the way the colonials ran it, so we're going to run it this way too. So there was some corruption. There continued to be the sense that South America was the land of the future, and it always would be, that it was never going to achieve its potential because there were still people who were taking advantage of it, but it wasn't colonial powers anymore, it was local people. So South America has gone through a long period of dictatorships and coups d'etat, and people saying, oh, it's just, the only thing that's constant in South America is that there's constant change. So there's just revolution. So South America is a wonderful place to visit. There's just lots of things that are going on. It's very stable. It's very easy to get there and very easy to visit. The geography of South America is there's a large river system called the Amazon River Basin that goes from, its headwaters are in Peru, and it flows 3,000 miles into the Atlantic Ocean from Iquitos, Peru to Belém, Brazil. And oftentimes the Amazon is miles across. You can't see the other side of the river. The Amazon is navigable by ocean-going vessels from the Atlantic Ocean, from Belém, all the way into Peru, because there's a coastal area on the eastern side of the Andes Mountains is this coastal plain, this large area, part of the Amazon rainforest. And so it's very easy to get up there and to put goods on ships. The Amazon rainforest is sometimes called the lungs of the world because it produces so much oxygen. In return, it recycles the carbon dioxide that we breathe out and gives us back oxygen. So land is still, people are still burning lots of land in South America. The farmers, someone would say, when my wife lived in Paraguay in South America, and the government wanted to settle this forested area, so they'd say to young couples who were married, here's an axe and a saw, and you can have this land, but you have to clear the trees. And these huge, old-growth trees. So people would say, oh, well, I can cut this down. It'll take me a long time to cut this tree down, but I'll work with my neighbors. And then, in order to clear the land for cattle to use or to plant crops, we have to burn. So they would burn the trees. And it's called slash and burn agriculture. And what would happen is that they'd burn the land because they would look at this land under the trees. There was lots of stuff growing under the trees. And that was it was like a closed ecosystem, that the trees would grow, the rain would fall on the trees and be filtered down, and the leaves would fall, and fruits and whatever things would decompose on the ground under the trees. So it became very, very rich. But once they cut the trees down, it changed the whole economic system, or the whole ecological system. So as I said before, human adaptation has effects on global change and global climate change and use of resources. Land could be then planted and used for some period of time, but when the because the soil was really pretty crummy underneath all this stuff, even though it was for some short time you could use it, but then the sun would bake this land and it would become like concrete, and it was called lateritic soil. So the lateritic soil would just become too hard to plant. So they'd go on and move to someplace next and cut down some more trees, do more slash and burn. So hence that was the westward movement of population in Brazil, for example, and in parts of the rest of Central America, South America. So economically, lots of resources to export, lots of things to get rid of and to sell to the world. But like a lot of unindustrialized or under-industrialized countries, they're sort of stuck in this cycle. So when the price of sugar goes down, those countries suffer because the big industrialized countries say, well, we don't need all these things anymore. So, or we found a substitute for sugar. During World War II, they found a substitute for rubber. So they made synthesized rubber because they couldn't, the Germans were interdicting the sea lane, so they couldn't get rubber from Brazil or from Southeast Asia, so they made synthetic rubber, and that had a huge impact on economies. So it's this back and forth between the industrialized countries and the industrializing countries, and still countries want to be independent economically and politically from the larger rest of the world. So I think that's about it for About South America. Please, there will be a quiz about this, and there will be a date for you to take a look at the book and to do some work on interpreting what we've talked about and applying it to South America. Thank you very much.